maybe plan isn't quite the right word, so maybe what we need to do is tighten up the language.
I do want some more directive as well. All right, good. Thank you. So that concludes our agenda item number 1. All right, so moving on to the consent agenda. For everybody in the audience, the items on the consent agenda are routine and may be approved by the board in one blanket motion. We have 2 items on our consent agenda today, and unless the board wishes to pull anything from the consent agenda, I'd be looking for a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
So approved.
So I hear a motion. How about a second? Second over here. Is there any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion to approve the consent agenda, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Any abstentions? I hear none. So the motion carries. The consent agenda is approved. We're moving into our regular business items then, and we do have a number of those, and I'm going to move forward on those. The first item is Resolution 12-09-77, which authorizing a contract with CH2M Hill for an electronic fare collection implementation technical services. Mr. General Manager.
Yeah, Mr. Board President, members of the board, I'd like to ask Chris Tucker of our staff to come forward, who's going to review a little bit this path to electronic fare collection with you. This is a major initiative, and we talked about this in relation to the budget process, but we wanted to make sure that you were fully aware of the direction we're going and the importance of this contract, which is really the first time the board will take an action associated with the implementation of an electronic fare system. Again, it's a long-term project. This is the start, and we go through the details of the procurement, but I thought it would help if Chris could go through the general direction and where we're headed with this. Chris?
Thank you, Neil. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I am excited and pleased to present our path to electronic fare collection. The second slide is the overview, and in so many words, it's the what, why, and how to get to electronic fare. What it is, why we do it in the first place, how it would work, the expected outcomes, risks, mitigations, how we would measure it, our success, and what those next steps and timelines are. On the third slide, what is electronic fare? So it's something that is used throughout transit agencies throughout the world. But it can really be summarized in 5 key components. So while it's a very complex system overall, the first component is the payment device, or the form factor, that our transit riders would carry with them. Today, that would be cash or a ticket that TriMet would issue. But in the electronic world, it can be anything that a customer has to make payments with, such as a contactless debit or credit card. It could be a mobile phone. It could even be a TriMet ID badge for our employees to tap and ride onto the bus or the train. It could even be a student ID or an employer ID. And it could even be just a smart card that we issue. And a good example might be like a Starbucks gift card, for example. So that's the actual form factor. There's also a validator, and this is the actual device that you would tap to get onto the bus, or something you would tap to get on to the train that we have on the platforms. You also have a communication network. So once you tap the device, it needs to communicate with the back office system. And that can be using cellular technology on the buses, or that could just be using fiber optics on the platforms, for example. The actual back office system would do all the heavy lifting. So that's the system in the background that integrates all the information and is kind of your decisioning engine. And then there's the payment processing. So that would be a new component where you actually have payments interacting real time with the banks. So in a nutshell, that's the 5 key pillars in an electronic fare system. And all this complexity, there are many more. That kind of gives you a framework of what electronic fare really is. On slide number 4, the big question is, why do electronic fare? Why are agencies throughout the world migrating to electronic fare? They've been doing so for decades, and one of the key indicators that we hear from many agencies is that it is a big customer convenience. It's easy to use, and it's simple to understand. So it's something that is convenient for customers to have yet another opportunity to pay, whether that be with something they're already carrying or a card in their wallet. It reduces fare leakage. It's something that helps us to better control the transfer times, for example, because it's all electronically managed. It saves on equipment maintenance costs. It really shifts somewhat from the electromechanical world into more of your back office software to do the heavy lifting. So it reduces that need to go out and maintain the machines as often. We would do it to work on all transit modes, whether that be bus, rail, commuter rail, or even our partner agencies. It certainly helps to provide seamless transfers. There's less discussion of what that form factor is between, say, C-Tran and TriMet, and you simply just tap and you go between the agencies with one particular item, such as a smart card. We definitely want to move into the current technology that's out there. We have been waiting for many years to watch this technology develop, and we believe now is the time that it's been proven throughout the United States and the world that we can leverage that to have more efficiencies at TriMet. So there'll certainly be the better fiscal controls for revenue, and we have a stretch goal, and that stretch goal is to fully fund the project through efficiencies and reduction in revenue loss. So those are kind of the key components of why we would do electronic fare. So how does it work? On slide 5, in the simplest form, this is the transaction flow, as you can see demonstrated on the slide. The customer acquires that form factor payment device. They tap the validator, goes to the back office, and it flows to the financial institution. And there are transactions that go back and forth. In proven systems, that transaction can happen as fast as 400 milliseconds, which is less than half a second. So it is an opportunity to quickly board and move on through with just a simple tap and go. On slide 6, this is what we call the technology leap for TriMet. We don't have an electronic fare system today. Our system is pretty basic and has been a model that's been around for several decades. Most agencies have jumped towards, or large agencies have jumped towards the technology and the evolution of the last 100 years. They've gone from tokens to magnetic stripe cards, which agencies have today and are still using. They've shifted to smart cards, which are something that you just tap and the information's on the card and it transacts with the system to give you a kind of a green light to board the bus. And there are many agencies who have made those transitions and are currently in that smart card world. You've got LA Metro, New York, Seattle, Chicago, and pretty much all the way up and down the West Coast, and the list goes on and on. The interesting dynamic now is that while the smart card system has been well developed and it's a great tool for the customers and the agencies, there's the new model and interest is called open payments. And really what that does is allows the customers to use whatever's in their wallet, such as a contactless debit or credit card. And that pulls back the transit agencies from having to more or less distribute all of those fare instruments, kind of like creating your own currency in a way. Instead of us having to distribute all of those, the customer just uses what's in their pocket or in their wallet. These transitions are exciting. There are agencies who are moving from smart cards into the open payment world. London, New York, Chicago. There are several others that have done pilots throughout the country. But there's one step that we're particularly excited about taking before we move into that investment, because that investment requires validators on the platforms and heavy lifting back office. We are looking at just a simple smartphone application that would work on an Apple iOS operating system or even an Android smartphone. So for those that have a smartphone, which certainly is not all of our writers, it's for early adopters who embrace technology. We certainly have some of those in Portland and in the region, that they will be able to download an application on their smartphone. They can use it paying with their banking information in advance, and they can take that ticket when they're ready to board. They can activate the ticket, and it'll simply be a flash pass on their mobile device, kind of like a pass with a battery on it is the way I like to think of it. So it literally just displays in animated fashion when you board the bus or show a fare inspector on rail. So it doesn't require the infrastructure for us. It's simply a device that we can get into many people's hands. And it's something that the rest of the country is excited to hear about and learn more about. On slide 7, what is this emerging technology? So I've talked a bit about the contactless payments, and mobile phones is a big push in the region for us. We believe about half of our riders have smartphones, and that's fine for those who have it. The big push is that as technology changes for all of us, we're going to start seeing fewer people using the credit card or debit card in their wallet, and more people pulling out their smartphone to make payments, whether that be at Starbucks or in the future maybe Target. The reason that that's exciting is that many people have a phone already in their pocket, and so they can use one device for whatever their needs are. So near-field communication simply allows the phone to be a payment device, and it streams a signal to the reader. Contactless debit cards and credit cards we've mentioned. There's even unique pilots and form factors such as a wristband, which you can put on your wrist, and that allows you just to tap as you go on. And that's a nice benefit for those who have dexterity challenges or don't want to get out the phone out of their pocket. That's being piloted in New Jersey right now. So I thought that was a neat, a creative way of leveraging payment technology for anybody. And then there's the future. We don't know what the future will look like in 5 to 10 years. We certainly want to plan for that. So the concept is open architecture system, which means that we'll be able to adapt this system overall for whatever that next payment device might be. Whether it's a fingerprint, who really knows? But whatever that is, we want to be able to plug into this system so that our shelf life can be extended for many years to come. On slide 8, what are the expected outcomes? This is an important piece that we really want to focus on. We certainly believe it'll be a richer customer experience, first and foremost. This is the reason many transit agencies move to these electronic payments, is that it gives customers more flexibility in getting information in their hands to use. And a few examples are that you can set it up online so it automatically reloads every month, so you don't have to go to a store to buy a pass or a machine or wait in the mail. It allows you to, if you were to lose that card, you can cancel it. Whereas now, if you lose your monthly pass, it's like cash, so you're out of that pass and unfortunately just have to purchase a new one. So it gives some greater flexibility. It's also easier to transfer between systems and modes. We just have one simple card to tap and go. But there will always be cash. We don't anticipate getting rid of cash. If we can reduce it some, that's good, but we certainly know that there are unbanked and underbanked customers who maybe just have a savings account who will always have cash and want to pay with cash. So we will continue to look at how we will support that, still accepting cash in fare boxes, for example. There are also prepaid cards, which are a fairly popular strategy that agencies have used, so the customers, if they want to participate in that simple tap and go, that they can go get a prepaid card and then use that for their contactless device so that they have that option as well. More efficient operations is an important piece. This is a good way to remove that decisioning piece by the operator. As it is now, they need to make a decision of whether that wadded up tissue transfer is still good and it was punched just right. This gives the opportunity to look at the system as it's either a red light or a green light, and they can make their decision, the customer, my fare is good and I can board. And it takes that out of the hands of the operator to have to make those decisions all day long. And the same goes for fare inspection, that it's a pretty simple, objective decision that either the funds are there or they're not. The marketing communication, I could probably spend all day talking about the benefits of it in this type of a system, but in a nutshell, there are benefits to having better data for employer programs, and it allows us in the future, if we were to have near-field communication, that when they tap to board the bus, we could send service information back to their phone if we so choose, or location-based advertising is an option as well. So there are many different ways to do it once you move in that digital world. There's enhanced planning capabilities. This is one of the key benefits of getting better data as far as how many youths are boarding at a particular stop to improve our service plan. And there are certainly opportunities to increase revenue, which we'll explore at every turn. And that can be anywhere from better controlling those the transfer times and looking at creative pricing models with this type of a solution. We also want to look at the cost reductions that we can, and that's shifting from your complex hardware environment and trying to focus more on that back office software environment. So that's kind of our overall what we expect to get out of a system like this. But there are risks. So on slide 9, we'll talk a little bit about what those risks may be. We certainly have limited resources at TriMet, and we've never launched a system specifically like this at TriMet before. So this is a new electronic fare collection system. So we know that there are many agencies who have done this, and we've been monitoring and talking with them frequently. But we do look for some consultant support, our technical services consultant who has experience launching these systems throughout the country to help us roll this out and help us make timely decisions. As I mentioned, this is a technology leap, so we need to make sure that TriMet is building in the plans over the next several years to how we will support that within our infrastructure, in our IT and operations plans long-term to support the shift going from this basic environment we're in now to this new system environment for collecting fares. There is the savings and reduce revenue loss. There are risks that we won't realize all the benefits that we are penciling out. One of the things that I'm particularly excited about and what we've learned from other agencies is do your business case first and follow it. Don't just assume that it's going to solve everything. Build your business case first, and that's a big piece of our planning over the next several months is making sure that this will pencil out and be what we expect and what our research shows us. The penetration rate is important because there's many approaches to launching a system like this. There are agencies who have 90+% penetration rate of their riders using smart cards, such as WMATA at Washington, D.C. But that's distributing all of those fares, and that can be kind of costly. We want to make sure that we learn from the public, do lots of outreach, and get that feedback on how best to roll out something like this. Do certain regions need particular more density of fare instruments at retail stores, or what does that demographic look like? And if we need to issue more smart cards to get our penetration rate up, we can make that decision at that time. So how will we measure success? This is one of my favorite slides. So slide 10. I think the first thing is we want to make sure that we are paying attention and gathering customer feedback, and that can be done via surveys and just through our normal comments intake line. We want to monitor boarding times on buses because we expect those to go down. We want to review our fare collection costs as a percent of total revenue. That's a key metric to look at. How are we reducing costs and how are we increasing revenue within one metric? It's important to track the percentage of riders using electronic fare, so how successful are we rolling this out? Finding accommodations for the unbanked, and ensuring a smooth integration of streetcar and C-Tran and surrounding properties. So on slide 11, what are the next steps? What we need to do is we've got a lot of work ahead of us over the next year. And we want to bring on this technical services consultant, CH2M Hill, to help us draft procurement alternatives, system design, financial analysis, and partnership agreements. We have to prepare the actual RFP to bring a contractor on to build this system, and then someone to help supervise the contractors, implement pilot phases, which are critical, and the overall system startup. So as we look at that plan, that's for the next year what we need to accomplish. So the timeline overall is sitting in front of you here. We'd like to bring on and implement here the consultant contract. As a side note, by spring, we hope to have that mobile app launched and available to the public to use for revenue service, which will be nice to see how that early adoption takes. By the middle of next year, we want to issue that contract, that RFP contract, award the contract maybe as early as spring of 2014, and a pilot as early as the PMLR opening of September 2015. We have an estimated system-wide full deployment of 2017. That timeline still needs to be confirmed as we work through all of our plans and decision points. So in summary, on slide 13, we believe that this is key to improve customer experience and operations, increase internal efficiencies, use the latest technology. We recognize it's a long-term regional project. We want to leverage the experience and the resources of the technical services consultant with a pilot launching as early as September 2015. Happy to answer any questions.
Good presentation. I see a lot of people writing notes. I bet you there are some questions.
This sounds really exciting. I don't know if I can go with the risk thing, but the other sounds great. I'm really pleased to hear that there's some folks that are just going to always use cash. So what that might look like, I think is really important.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
That's what you're Craig, yes.
Yeah, as you were going through this, I was just curious about the durability and reliability of the system. You know, if you just address that.
Yeah, well, there's several aspects. So more from kind of the infrastructure of the hardware, or more kind of your form factor payment, or all of it?
Well, I was, as you were starting out, I was really thinking about our current fare machines, and we do have challenges with keeping those all operational all the time.
Yeah.
With card readers, you know, and I'm not a techie, so I'm
Yeah.
kind of struggling here, but with the wireless signals, the software, I mean, what do you expect in terms of reliability, durability? You know, computers go down, so.
That's right. They do, and they still are doing that. The validators are a very simple piece of equipment, which is a good thing. So very few moving parts. In fare boxes and ticket machines, it's a complex environment with belts and mechanisms and components. A validator is an extremely simple device where you simply just tap it and you go. So it doesn't require those moving parts. It's really just a fixed board that communicates with the software. The wireless communication is definitely a concern. You know, New Jersey Transit told me last week that they were concerned initially years back, but now that the data speeds have increased, and you have what's called 4G or LTE wireless communication, that the reliability is much higher. So what happens is, if there is a communication breakdown, there are still things called like a blacklist that basically doesn't allow the card to go through if that card isn't good. So it can still function if there's not wireless connectivity. There is always some risk involved if that transaction doesn't go through, and those are policy decisions we'll have to make on whether or not we grant access at that time and allow the person to go through if the hardware or the communication network fails. So that validator and the communication piece are important. I think the communication piece is what we're relying on that wireless carrier to have that support of that data connection. The back office has been a proven system that we still have to design to make sure we're comfortable with reliability and scalability. To put in a perspective for the smartphone application, we are having a high degree of reliability that's required, 99.99% reliability. We can build those high specifications for the contractor to achieve. That has not been a concern that we've heard echoed from agencies, is relying to the back office. So we have a pretty high confidence level that the system is, that the technology is well developed. But because it is a multi-tier approach, that communication breakdowns can occur. So we have to make sure the piloting of the system is very thorough.
Thank you.
Yes, looking at the resolution, I think you have your 20 to 30 million expected to cost to implement it. And then as a part of your presentation, you talked about increased revenue, which Greg and I have been talking about quite a bit, wherever we can find pots. Have you been able to estimate, in your discussions with the other cities, how much increased revenue could be given the cost that it would take to implement, or?
It's a great question. It's not something that they widely publish. So I only have one key example that I recall giving. It was a positive example. If I had a negative one, I'd tell you, but I don't. MARTA had touted that they were able to increase revenue by several percentage points because of their electronic smart card system. They launched that several years ago. So we do have a positive example of what can happen. The key for us is probably a balance of increasing some revenue and decreasing some costs. Kind of a thumbnail goal is about a 2% reduction in total cost of collections overall. And that alone would more than pay for the system in the long term. So we know kind of what our metrics are, but now the key is we have to make several decisions on how we want the system to behave and to perform. And those decisions will help drive the overall cost. So I don't know if that directly answers the question, but that's kind of where our mind is right now with it.
So we can't budget the revenue yet.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
All right.
I like it.
I would just note that total fare revenues in fiscal year 12 was $102 million, so a couple percentage is a really noticeable amount of money for us. And so that's why I think, these might seem like the small percentage changes, but it's applied to a fairly big base. So I think there's great opportunity here as we look ahead.
2% doesn't sound like a lot, but in conjunction with what you just said.
Director Stovall, do you have some comments or questions?
I have a quick comment in regards to this being a significant project. I mean, we think about, the ubiquity of cell phones and electronic payment systems. We rarely think about how much work it takes to implement those. And so it is a tremendous effort. I was just looking at the timeline thinking, oh man, 2017, that's a long ways away when we estimate system-wide deployment. But certainly it is going to take a lot of work and effort to get to that point. A comment that I would make in regards to, as an organization that takes payments and multiple payments across the system, we must move this direction. It's not like we have a choice. It's not if, but when. We have to start this process, and there are going to be many changes, I think, between now and 2017 when we do implementation to the way we pay for things. And this is that first step that gets us going in the right direction. So I certainly applaud our efforts in moving this way. I know I actually have everything from my boarding passes for airlines to my, I hate to admit it, my Starbucks cards on my phone. So it's always there and always available. If I can get more things on there, I would. And one thing that I would actually recommend, and I'm sure CH2 and Hill, if they receive this contract, will of course recommend this. But I'm sure if I don't say it, it just may not get in there, kind of like the bridge being too low. But I didn't say that. So, getting to the real point, the ability for the system, my major concern would be getting locked into something that doesn't give us the opportunity to scale, or something that's too of a proprietary nature that we cannot grow outside of that system, and we must spend a significant amount of money because, as we know, technology changes very, very rapidly, and our ability to change with technology is going to be something that's going to be critical for us to make this investment. And as Board Member Schweitzer mentioned, continue to get that return on investment over a long period of time. I'll finish off by asking a question, and this is more from a personal nature, just to see if you guys have touched on this at all. But from a perspective of doing the research on how many people in the Portland metropolitan area actually have smartphones, has that been touched on at all? What percentage of the population?
In this market have
In this market.
smartphones? Not specifically that I have in this market. I know the U.S. national average was 50%. I think it was as of February. What we do have is information back from February of 2010 that showed the smartphone usage for our riders being at about 43%. And as that line grew at that time on the national average, it was only about 38%. So we were already higher than the national average. So with the recent study showing at about 50%, we feel pretty confident that we're right about that, but we still want to validate that. That's what's important to us, is to understand, are our assumptions now correct for this market? This market could be unique, so that's what we're looking at.
I do have one final comment in regards to, actually no, I'll go ahead and wrap it up and let Board Member Clark take the microphone.
So thank you, and a good presentation. If we do have in speaking of our stretch goal of providing a self-funded outcome, I would encourage us not just have it as a goal, but to have a business plan to achieve that. And to the extent that certain agencies, maybe either publicly, because of their own internal considerations or because of marketplace conditions, don't want to influence the price of these kinds of systems by sharing savings or taking care of this, so you can, whatever. Let's have a plan. Let's have a strategic plan that not only achieves that stretch goal, but I encourage a couple other aspects to the stretch goal. That there's a relationship that Consuelo mentioned to the social environment, which you addressed in terms of how many folks do or do not have technology. I would encourage us to have a stretch goal as associates with our physical environment. We have some stations which accessibility to service transit is, you have to go through a gate, if you will, pay. In some cases in the mall, we don't have that capacity at present. Buses, you have a single point of entry, and presumably if somebody comes in the back door. And then the stretch goal in terms of expandability and adaptability over time. But to the extent that none of us are clairvoyant about the future, I think it is good to imagine what prospects there are. But I think we can be specifically clairvoyant and prescriptive in terms of measuring anticipated revenue gains, savings, and then investing those either in the completion of this project or in the investments in terms of physical environment, social considerations for those that might not otherwise have access. And then could at some point, if we get past those 2 points, could we continue to take some of these savings or investments in new revenue and apply them to service expansion, fare enforcement, so.
Yeah, I appreciate those comments.
I think it becomes a strategic plan, not just a project.
Yes, yeah, and so I think that's raises even higher the importance that we firm up our plan strategically and for this project long-term. I would defer to Neil for what we would do if we had increased revenue from this project, outside of paying for the project. And the open architecture, which you both astutely pointed out, is a critical component for us, as we do not want to have a situation where we build this complex system and then we can't adapt to it because the contractor is stuck with, this is all I can do for you. And frankly, that has been a model throughout some of the agencies throughout America. And so our approach has been that we want to invest and explore open architecture, which allows us to change that system. Let's say that the readers, the validators, don't work as well as we expect them to work. We don't want to be stuck with that one type of validator when there are many, many manufacturers out there who would love to have our business, so we can go out and spec more details on what that validator might look like so that it's maybe more robust in this environment. So that open architecture, I think, is an important piece for us as well.
Dr. Bethel?
Most of all my questions have been covered already.
Thank you.
And just want to thank them for doing such a great presentation again.
Thank you. The only question I have is kind of along the same lines as Director Clark, which is kind of, I'll look forward to seeing how you actually determine where to place the validators for the light rail system, how you're going to do that. I think there are some true challenges there, and I suspect you've already thought about those, but I'll look forward to kind of the discussion and dialogue about how we best do that to make it effective and efficient. So with that, did you want to talk about the actual resolution before us? Or?
Well, perhaps I can just give you a few words about this. This was a very thoroughly researched RFP. We had, in the end, 2 very qualified firms offering their services for this, LTD Service, who we've worked with many times, as well as CH2M Hill, who, again, we've also worked with many times. And in the end, the highest qualifications, and for both phases of work, presumably we move ahead, lowest price was CH2M Hill. So based on the process that we've gone through, then that would be a recommendation to use to award this contract to CH2M Hill. And indeed, all of the questions that you've raised and issues that you've brought forward are really key items of getting some additional technical help. We've been through this before to help us answer those questions over the next year. And the notion then would be we would end up, as Chris noted, with procurement documents, which are really to begin to procure the system really toward the end of next year. I would just note also in relation to Board Member Clark's comment, I would tell you that I think generally TriMet is pretty allergic to these closed systems provided by one vendor because we find them pretty limiting. And this is a situation, I think that LEAP chart is always very interesting. We're leaping over a number of technologies, but to some extent, the next year or 2 will be really key about where do technologies migrate to, because we're trying to reach a point in the future, 2017, and I don't know that if we think back 5 years, we would have predicted where we are with technology right now. So we have to be pretty flexible as we move ahead with this, so we can make sure that we meet the state of technology in 2017 as we implement the system.
Good.
With that, recommend approval.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. And I bet you some of the people in the audience are with CH2M Hill. You want to raise your hands. I suspect that There, I put one, okay, one of them back there, it's easier. So, and thank you for coming. You heard all of our comments and suggestions. So with that, do I have a motion to approve Resolution 12-09-77, authorizing a contract with Sage Terminal?
So moved, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Second?
Have a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on this item? Okay, with that, I'll call for a vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none. Any abstentions? None. Motion is approved. Thank you. Moving on to the next item is Resolution 12-09-78, authorizing an increased change order allowance to the contract with I&E Construction Incorporated for the Barber Boulevard Transit Center Stormwater Retrofit Project.
And again, my apologies that we're back to board with this issue. You might recall that in August, you actually approved an increased change order allowance for a portion of this work. As contractor proceeded and as our negotiation proceeded, that amount proved inadequate. So we're back to you seeking additional authority. I would also just reiterate, and I can have Dan answer any questions about the technical issues that were driving this cost, but I would just reiterate that the pricing, or the funding for these change orders and the entire work is actually coming from ODOT and Bureau of Environmental Services, so there's no effect on TriMet budget related to that. I suspect work is a little bit like remodeling a bathroom in an old house, and so that's a bit of a problem and a simple analogy, but we'd be happy to answer any other questions that you might have about that.
Any questions from the board? Okay. Oh, go ahead, have a question.
Yeah, I would very much like to hear from Dan about kind of what's driving this. I do have to say that the size of the increase is to the point where it's pushing the comfort level. And I recognize that we're in this thing, we need to carry it through to conclusion, but it's a big increase. We still have a couple of phases of this project to go. And if you can address a little bit how we got to this point and what lessons we can take away from this for in the future kind of project.
Be happy to. Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. Yeah, there was a sort of a collective groan, I'm sure, with all of you as well as all of us when we realized that what we had come back for in August was going to prove to be insufficient. This is unusual for us. This is a pretty high change order percentage now, moving from what you had approved, which was about 30%, upwards to now about 75%. That is unusual. 30% is not terribly out of the range for this type of work where you're opening up the ground and dealing with what you find there. 70% is pretty high. There are three primary factors that are causing these increases. The first has to do with the design itself. I think as I explained in August, what we're doing is we're building stormwater collection trenches and tying them into the existing drainage system. And if we intend to tie in at a certain location that is between a place that could be measured, which we're doing, sometimes it's not where we thought it was. It doesn't necessarily go perfectly straight from point A to point B where we could measure it. So when we opened it up and it's at a different elevation, we sometimes have to increase our quantities to chase that existing system downhill so that we can tie into it. Then there are two types of changes that we're having to do with when we uncover new ground. One of those is where we find utilities, water lines or electric lines or things that we either didn't know about or aren't where we planned on. We have to work around them. And the second has to do with the soil materials themselves. Sometimes it's just unsuitable material, either large rock or soft materials that have to be removed and replaced with better materials. So those are the three primary drivers. When we were here in August seeking the increase, at that time we were in the second of 4 phases. That in itself is a little unusual. Normally you would open up the entire ground at one phase, see what you have to deal with, and then you would kind of know where you're going to be. But because this is an active park and ride facility, we've done it in 4 distinct pieces so that we can move the parking around as the contractor does this work, which means that every new phase you have new conditions. We were in the middle of phase 2 and projecting to the end, and it turned out that the second half of phase 2 and most of phase 3 have been worse than we had anticipated. So simply our projection was not sufficient. That's all I can say. So now we're finishing up phase 3. We believe we've sized this plenty big enough to get through phase 4. Hopefully it's too big, but again, we don't want to have to come back a third time. So that's the situation with this.
Any other questions?
Quick question, just follow up on that. So, I mean, I think we've heard kind of the scenario of why we are where we are. I think another part of Director Frost's question was, what did we learn from this? Because ultimately, you know, we're spending other people's money at this point. I don't have a problem with that, it's other people's money. But where I do have an issue is that we're managing the overall construction project, and if this were our money, what did we learn from it so that we can utilize? I know construction, as soon as we open the ground, it becomes difficult to know what's under there. I know of a project a client of mine just did recently, and they did all the geotechnical studies they could, but once they got into it, they found large boulders that significantly increased the cost of the project. So I know that exists, but was there anything now, looking back, that we could have done differently? Because that is a large difference in where we were.
A couple of things, I believe. You know, you can always do more design and more site investigation. You can do potholing to find out where those utilities are. You can do more potholing to determine what the materials are. And that's kind of a trade-off you make when you size the design. So we did very little of that, and so you know, we're facing some of those consequences. I would say, however, that the cost would have been the cost. You know, had we found them, we still would have to do what we're doing today. Another option we could have considered was maybe doing this on a design-build basis, so that we really take the design actually to just kind of a schematic level, go open up the ground, determine what we need to do, and then build it. We didn't do that. This was a low bid. It was actually a very competitive bid. We had a lot of bidders, and the low bidder was pretty low. And so they obviously bid, you know, very strictly what they saw in the plans. And so again, we could have used an alternative approach. For such a small contract, that probably wasn't justified. So again, I think the cost would have been the cost either way. We just had known that we had a better number going in.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, with that, is the board ready to offer a motion to approve Resolution 12-09-78?
So moved.
Motion? Have a second? Second. Have a second? Any further discussion by the board? Okay, let's have a vote. All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Hearing none. Any abstentions? None. Motion is approved. Moving on then, the next item is Resolution 12-09-79, which is authorizing a contract with Siemens Industries to design, furnish, and install system components for the Portland-Milwaukee Light Rail Transit Project. I bet those folks on the other side are with Siemens, not CHO. You're all with Siemens? There we go. Okay. Thank you for coming here.
Mr. Board President, again, thank you, Dan, for staying put. There may be some questions, but this is a very important contract for us, and has been through a very major process as well. This started with the board actually approving this as an alternative procurement and RFP process that we've gone through to actually make sure that the contractor is very qualified. And what's really important about this is that this is the linear engine for the light rail system. And so it's incredibly important work, incredibly sensitive work. And I'm very pleased to tell you that as a result of this procurement, we have both an excellent contractor and an excellent price. We have worked in the past with Siemens. We have very high regard for the quality of their engineering and the quality of the products that put into this. I would also note that Siemens has a strong local presence. The office that this work is actually done out is in Tualatin, together with an area where actually some of the assembly of components is done there as well. But again, it was a very competitive proposal with some very excellent firms involved. So we're very pleased to be here to recommend Siemens. And I wanted to just note, as Board President noted, Thierry Goddard, who is the president of Siemens Infrastructure, the Smart Grid Division, is here with us today, and we're very pleased to have them here, very pleased to recommend this contract for your approval. We happy to answer any questions. There's a lot of very technical components to this work, as you would imagine, and certainly we can go through that if it's your desire.
Question. My concern comes as exactly what happened with the stormwater retreatment thing. The cost of change orders. I'm noticing that Siemens, maybe I didn't say the name right, comes in at 17% below, 48 as opposed to the others being a little bit higher. I'm a little cautious and concerned that once we get into this, the change orders put us up higher. And what was so significantly different in where the others were bidding at and the bid that has been accepted? Is there something just in my mind, and I'm not sure that it's there, that this occurred, but is there something missing? Did we not get something that the others were proposing and we were going to have to buy later and it's going to add to the cost? Just cautious.
We're always cautious of that too. I would note that 3 of the 4 proposers' prices though were quite good, so very competitive pricing. I think in this case, one of the things we're going to be most watchful of is the schedule, more so than the technical work. You know, we have the project divided into pieces and it's scheduled very tightly, and the civil work has to turn over to the systems work in the appropriate schedule in order for them to be as productive as they planned. And so that's something that's incumbent on us to deliver the parcels available to them when we said they'd be available. I think that's our #1 risk here.
Thank you.
Other questions, Steve?
In a similar vein, yes, 17% below our fair cost, and it's not saying anything. I'm not trying to be critical here, but if I was the Siemens president or chairman of the board, I'd say, we just lost 10% on the table of 2 bidders and 22% on another, and what the heck were you folks thinking? We just don't want to get surprised. I think the practice of change orders is understood, but surprises are not appreciated. And you folks manage those very well.